Now we're going to look at fire safety. At the end of this session, I want you guys to be able to state the 3 elements required to start for a fire to start, explain some methods that will prevent fires from occurring, and list the 4 main classes of fire. But what is fire? Fire essentially is a combustion which happens when fuel and oxygen come together with heat. Fire can get up to hugely high temperatures very, very quickly, and as a result we need to be very, very careful. Fire needs 3 things to start, and I've already mentioned them: oxygen, fuel, and heat. If you remove any one of those things, the fire would go out. Because fires can spread so quickly, it's sensible for us to try and stop them from happening at all. So prevention is better than cure. So what can we do to stop fires from starting? On a building site, a good start would be what we call good housekeeping. Good housekeeping essentially means keeping your working area clean and tidy, and especially from flammable materials. As a plumber, we are more exposed to the risk of fire than most other trades because we work regularly with heat reducing equipment, blowtorches. On building sites, we should often, these days, we have to get a hot works permit before we use any heat reducing equipment like a blowtorch. You'd normally get that from the site office. Hot working requires strict working methods. So using a blowtorch requires strict working methods, one of which we've already talked about, which is keeping a work area tidy. But also we are required to keep a fire extinguisher with us at all times when we're soldering. We should also finish work with a blowtorch, finish our soldering at least an hour before we leave site. The reason for this is because sometimes you might have some material that's smouldering, and within the course of an hour it might then catch light. So what you should do is you should finish soldering an hour before you finish, and then go back and check the previous areas you've been soldering before you leave site. If you do solder anywhere near a combustible material, you should use a heatproof mat. In fact, you should use a heatproof mat anytime you solder close to any material, because it just reduces the risk of the material being damaged. When we solder, we should also make sure we remove any insulation from the pipework for at least 300 mil so it doesn't get damaged or burnt. And if you do think you catch any material with a flame, wet the area and check again in a few minutes to check it's okay. If you solder in a confined space, for example under a floor, under a bath, or anywhere that's confined, always make sure the area is clear of any combustible materials. But you also need to be aware, in confined spaces there's also a risk of carbon monoxide building up and other dangerous gases if you work with a blowtorch in there for a long period of time. If it's only a short period of time, there's very little risk of these gases building up, but if you're working for a long time in a confined space with a heat producing equipment, you need to be very, very aware of potentially toxic fumes. Fires are split into different classifications. Solid fires are considered Class A. Things like wood, paper, plastic, curtains, sofas would all be considered as solid materials, and they'd be classed as Class A fires. This is useful to know when we start to look at the different extinguishers. Different extinguishers would be good for different types of fires. Class B fires are things that contain flammable liquids, things like petrol, paraffin, oil, for example. And Class C fires are flammable gases, propane, butane, methane, acetylene, etc. Class D fires are flammable metals, potentially aluminium, magnesium and titanium are 3 examples, potassium, sodium, all flammable metals. Class E fires are electrical fires. So if you have an electrical fire, it would be considered a Class E fire. You need to be especially careful with Class E fires, because if you put water on them, it will increase the risk. Actually, on a lot of these fires, if you put water on it, significantly increase the risks. Class F, Class E and Class B fires you'd actually increase the hazard to yourself if you use water. And Class C fires, it's not effective at all. So the only class of fire you can really use a water extinguisher on is a Class A fire, a solid fuel fire. Okay. And finally, Class F fires, cooking fires essentially, oil pan fires. There's different things we can do to reduce the risk. Again, we've covered a few of them. One is not smoking at work. Make sure you maintain your electrical equipment and use the right circuit protection device on them as well. Keep your workplace tidy and remove all combustible materials to a safe place. We can also make sure we store highly flammable materials carefully, sensibly, especially liquids. And in fact, don't store them at all unless you have to. Dispose of cigarettes carefully and have clearly marked evacuation points, fire points nearby. Okay, have a set procedure of what to do if there's a fire, and have regular evacuation drills. As part of that, we'd put up signs and notices so people are aware of what they need to do, keep fire exits clear, and test the fire alarms frequently. If the fire does break out, if you're the first person to fire, the very first thing you should do is to check you're safe, and then once you've done that, move to a safe place, raise the alarm, call the fire brigade, and then evacuate the building. As you evacuate, close all the doors and windows on the way out to make sure that we minimise the amount of oxygen coming in that could potentially feed the fire. Okie dokie. So in summary, fire requires 3 elements: fuel, oxygen and heat. To burn, remove any one of them, then the fire will go out. All fire extinguishers are colour coded, and we're going to look at that in our next session. And we can reduce the risk of a fire starting by keeping our workplace clean and tidy. And it's also, we need to make sure that we know the evacuation drill if there is a fire.